We're going to be in the book of Matthew this morning. I've been checking in with our kids and teachers. First week of school, exhausting but good is what I hear. So I want to continue to pray for our kids and our teachers as they're getting in the rhythm of things. I wanted to share with you just by way of prayer and also just kind of casting a little vision as we are going into the book of Acts. So the goal is we're going to be wrapping up Matthew next week and springboarding into the book of Acts. And as I've been thinking about the book of Acts and meditating on the lessons in it, I've been really meditating in this idea of a couple things. Spirit-filled living. What does it look like to live filled with the Spirit, being led by the Spirit? But then also in the book of Acts, what do we see? We see people on mission. And there's all these different things there's this Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, the remotest parts of the earth sort of thing. And I'm going to put an emphasis on missional-minded sort of thinking is the idea. And not just these great grandiose missions across the world, but also in our own backyard. And here's one thing that fell in our lap, which I'm super excited about. The Lake Stevens High School, their Performing Arts Center is being remodeled. And they cannot have their fall musical there because of the remodel. And so they contacted us, said, hey, can we do our fall musical in your church building and bring like 2,000 people through the building for 2 weeks, And I was like, let me pray about that. And we did the prayer. We talked to the elders and the staff about it, and there's some obvious inconvenience upon us. But how cool is this opportunity to have the Lake Stevens High School and the community come and use our building, and we can bless them in a way. So I don't want to just hand them the keys to the building and say, yeah, go for it. I want to be intentional with it as we interact with the different facilitators and the parents that are involved and the kids being involved, and pray that it's more than just giving them the building, but it will be something that God can use. And I was thinking about this idea when we were fishing up in Alaska at that fish camp. I was thinking we were chasing the fish around this bay, and I was thinking, here I am. I'm chasing the fish around, trying to catch them. But what do I do when I'm a fisher of men? Normally, I just sort of sit in here and I wait for fish to come in the boat, and that's not the way it works, right? But here he is. I've got a bunch of fish coming in the boat, and I'm excited about it. Anyways. I wanted you guys to commit that to prayer, if you would be praying for that. That's going to happen in November. So they're going to start play practice and stuff in October, and then they're going to use the facility in November. And we'll make sure you're aware of that if you want to come out and join. You'll have to buy tickets, but you can certainly be involved. Cool stuff. Anyways, other things going on. We're going to be, again, starting in the book of Acts, and there we'll be springboarding into our life groups. And so we're going to have, if you're not aware, you're not familiar with our life groups, we provide questions from Sunday morning's message that you can digest and chew on with your group during the week. And those are for groups, but also for individuals, too, to take the message a little bit further. There's only so much that I can do on a Sunday morning in the 30-minute or 45-minute window, and you'll see today. There's only so much I can cover and do, and it's sometimes with a broad brush. And so I'm excited about life groups because we can take and go back and say, hey, well, what about this thing that he didn't really cover or really talk about, or what's the application? Not just like, here's the interpretation of it, but how does this really apply to my lives? How do I live this out? So that's what I like about the life groups and the questions that go with it, and looking forward to those things and be praying for those things coming up. So. Well, let's get right into it. We're going to be in the book of Matthew. Here we're in chapter 27 as we continue our study on Sunday mornings through the New Testament, book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. We got through just the first part of 27 last week. We looked at this, the end of 26, beginning of 27, at Peter's denial and this bitterness that came along in his life as he denied Christ. And remember the temptation that we talked about that Jesus had warned us in the garden to pray that you may not be tempted. The temptation was to deny the existence of Jesus. It was to deny his lordship and his authority in our life. And that continues to play out, and we have to guard against that temptation. And then we saw Judas's remorse here. We pick up here, verse 11. I want to read a chunk and then come back through it. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." And while he was being accused by the chief priest and the elders, he did not answer. And Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" And he did not answer him with regard to even a single charge, till the governor was quite amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the people any one prisoner whom they wanted. At that time, they were holding a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that because of envy, they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him a message saying, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man. For last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. But the governor said to them, "Which of these two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." And Pilate said to them, "What then shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" And they all said, "Crucify him." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they kept shouting all the more, saying, "Crucify him." And when Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather a riot was starting, he took water, he washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves." And all the people said, "His blood shall be upon us and our children." And then he released Barabbas for them. But after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. Lord, again, we just pray as we read your word, as we hear it, Lord, that you would reveal yourself to us, reveal your will to us. Lord, that you would speak through your word. Bless us now, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Pilate, Roman governor of the area. Historical records say that he was a cruel and wicked, harsh man. The Jews detested him for using temple funds to build an aqueduct. They detested the idea that he brought in images of Caesar, almost like in a way of an idol. And really, the Jews of the time detested Rome altogether, as they saw them as unwelcome occupiers. And yet, we saw here that they are collaborating, these Jewish leaders are collaborating with Rome. Look back at chapter 27, verse 1. It said, when morning had come, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus to put him to death. In verse 2, it says that they bound him, and they led him away, and delivered him to Pilate the governor. I said last week that they compromised what they knew to be right to accomplish their lust. And the truth is, anytime we're accomplishing our lust, we're going to be compromising what we know to be right. Rome didn't care that this claim of Jesus being the Messiah. They wouldn't care that Jesus would be the leader of the Jewish people in a messianic way. And the Jews knew this, and so we actually read in Luke 23:2 that they accused Jesus of treason. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." But we know this is false representation. I mean, what did Jesus say? Jesus said, give to Rome what is Rome, Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. And his kingdom didn't come to oppose Rome's kingdom. Jesus is King of Kings, Lord of Lords. His kingdom is far more superior, far greater, so much different than this earthly kingdom of Rome. But the religious leaders knew how to push Rome's buttons. And so they accuse him here of treason, that somehow he's going to be an insurrectionist. He's going to come against his king, who's going to oppose Caesar's kingship there. So Pilate asks this question here, verse 11, as he stands before, Jesus is standing before Pontius Pilate here, and he asks the question, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said to him, it is as you say. Similar to what we read last week, chapter 26, at this, verse 63, at this mockery of a trial before the Jewish leaders. It says, Jesus kept silent, and the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God that you tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus said, you have said it yourself. Jesus didn't need to make these great grandiose claims of who he was. His power displayed who he was. His presence spoke for themselves. Think about the triumphal entry when Jesus came to Jerusalem, and everybody was shouting out, Hosanna, the king has come, and the Pharisees told him, hey, tell your people to be quiet. And what Jesus said, if these guys are quiet, even the rocks are going to cry out. Pilate presses in here. Verse 13, he's like, don't you hear how many things are being testified against you? All these false accusations. Verse 14 says he didn't answer him with regard to even a single charge. It says that he was quite amazed. He marveled at the fact that this guy wouldn't stick up for himself. But this is the very thing that Isaiah the prophet prophesied about. Isaiah 53:7, one of the prophecies we have of the Messiah to come. It says, he who was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth, like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shears, so he did not open his mouth. And again, we see that Jesus is going willingly to the cross. This was an act of obedience to his Father. And we see this interesting interchange here of Pilate. I want to look at Pilate as a type here, one who is gaining understanding of the truth, and yet he doesn't act on his knowledge of the truth here. He's got this, verse 15, we see this releasing of the prisoner. It was this accustomed, verse 15 says, at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the people one prisoner. This was like a goodwill gesture to the people. And Pilate here, he offers Barabbas, this notorious prisoner who was an insurrectionist, a murderer, or Jesus the Christ. In verse 18, it says, for he knew that because of envy, they had handed him over. That is Jesus. Pilate knew that he had an innocent man in his custody. Pilate knew that Jesus hadn't done anything wrong. And so I think he offers this ridiculous trade. Hey, do you want this murderer, this complete, evil, wicked man, or should I release Jesus? And I think he's trying to get off the hook. He's like, hey, I'm going to offer this ridiculous choice. And obviously they're going to go for Jesus. They wouldn't let this murderer go out. One man of violence, one man, a man of love. And Pilate there sitting, verse 19, he's sitting on the judgment seat, and what happens? See, he gets a message from his wife. It says, have nothing to do with this righteous man. So he already knows that he has an innocent man in front of him. He already recognizes the motive behind these Jewish leaders who bring him, verse 18, that it was with envy that they brought Jesus to him. And then he gets this urgent message from his wife to have nothing to do with this righteous man. Can I just say, our wives at times can offer unique and good intel. I'm just saying that, just throwing that out there. There are times our wife can offer good, unique, special insight at times. And the Holy Spirit can use our wives. I love it. I mean, this is something that he already understood. He had an innocent man. He already understood the motives of these guys. And here the Holy Spirit brings confirmation from his wife here, saying, hey, I have nothing to do with this guy. But what happens? The religious leaders, they sway the crowd, which ends up swaying Pilate, and they ask for Barabbas. Look at verse 20. He says, the chief priests and the elders, they persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas to put Jesus to death. The governor asks again, he tries to get out of this again, and said to them, well, which one of these two do you want me to release for you? And they say, Barabbas. And then Pilate asks this question. And I think this is one of these questions that we all need to wrestle with. Verse 22 says, what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? What are you going to do with Jesus? This reminds me when Jesus took his guys up to Caesarea Philippi, the northern regions of Israel. And he asked that question, hey, who do the people say that I am? And they had all these different unique answers and some flattering answers. And then Jesus gets down, I think he looks him in the eye and he says, well, who do you say that I am? And when we've looked at that, we understand that the answer of who you say Jesus is, that has these eternal consequences. And this is on the same level, I think. He asks this question, what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? What are you going to do with Jesus? We're called to submit to Jesus. We're called to believe by faith in Jesus. It's interesting, too, as he asks this question, he reminds himself and he reminds the crowd that he's the Christ. Jesus, who's called the Christ. The multitudes cry out, though. What do they say? Crucify him. There's a rejection here. A full-on rejection. He tries to reason with these guys, verse 23. What evil has he done? But they kept shouting all the more, crucify him. And then he tries washing his hands here, showing some, symbolic thing that he is excused from this. But Pilate's not excused from this. In fact, he's the one that has the power to release Jesus. I was thinking about this idea that, looking at Pilate as a type, you might find yourself in a situation where you know Jesus to be right. And yet culture around you is pressing in and wanting you to do away with Jesus. Let's just put him away. Let's get rid of this Jesus. And there's a challenge there to us. What are you going to do with Jesus? Are you going to live for him? Are you going to place him at the proper place in your life as king? Put him on the throne of your life? There's a trajectory there that happens when you put Jesus as king of your life. They ended up scourging him here, it says in verse 26. This is nasty. This is a multi-cord whip with metal or glass or maybe a piece of bones on the end of this whip. It would rip the flesh off the person. Some would even die just from the scourging. And note here that Pilate is persuaded by the crowds. He knows what to do is right, and yet he is persuaded by the crowds, it says here. And he can't escape the responsibility here. And I think that's important to note, that each one of us is responsible for what we do with Jesus. That's an individual responsibility, that what we do with Jesus and who we say Jesus is. And these have eternal consequences, eternal lasting consequences. And we can't be persuaded or pushed around by the crowd. We need to do what we know is to be right. I read this quote. This guy was talking about Pilate. And he says, "We see in this miserable man a living pattern of many of our politicians and our leaders of this world. How many there are who know well that their public acts are wrong, that they not have the courage to act up for their knowledge. They fear the people, they dread being laughed at, and they cannot bear being unpopular." I like this. He says, "They're like dead fish that float with the tide. Human praise is the idol before which they bow down, and to that idol they sacrifice conscience, inner peace, and a mortal soul." At the end of the day, unprincipled men. So Pilate, he goes with the crowd. He releases a murderer and commits to murder an innocent man. And it says then, verse 27, the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium, and they gathered the whole Roman cohort around him, and they stripped him, and they put a scarlet robe on him. And after twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and the reed in his right hand, and they knelt down before him, and they mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." And they spat on him, and they took the reed, and they began to beat him on his head. And after they had mocked him, they took the scarlet robe off him, and they put his own garments back on him and led him away to crucify him. And as they were coming out, they found a man of Cyrene named Simon, whom they pressed into service to bear his cross. So Jesus, already being, beaten in that mock trial in the middle of the night, and then scourged here, is then taken and beaten by this Roman cohort, and then expected to carry his cross to the place of crucifixion. Historical records point out that normally the vertical piece of the cross would be on site, and the ones being crucified would carry the large beam, the cross beam. And at this point, Jesus is so badly beaten that he can't even carry the cross beam to the place. And so this man, Simon from Cyrene, no doubt a Jewish man who had probably come to Jerusalem for the Passover, as we've talked about, is pressed into service to carry the cross to that spot. It says, verse 33, when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull, they gave him wine to drink mixed with gall, and after tasting it, he was unwilling to drink. Golgotha here in the Latin means Calvary. It's Calvary, which Calvary and then place of the skull. And it points to this location that's close outside the city walls on a main road on a hillside. It's interesting. One of the places that we visit in Jerusalem is called the Garden Tomb. You maybe heard me talk about it. Or you can, if you're looking it up, it's called Gordon's Calvary. And it is one of the supposed sites of where Jesus was buried. And I think it matches the biblical description, and I'm a believer, and that's the spot. We've gone there and seen it. And in sight from the Garden Tomb, you actually see a cliffside that has this imprint of what looks like a skull. And it's an interesting observation. And it could be that that is Golgotha. It's hard to say exactly. But there's some good evidence that points to this. But there was a description here, the hillside looked like a skull, but also could be at the place of the crucifixion, there would be bones and remains from those who had been crucified. And so Jesus was taken to this spot, and it says here that they tried to give him, verse 34, wine and drink mixed with gall. This was some sort of potion. It would be more of like a numbing drug that was trying to give to Jesus. And note how here Jesus refuses this numbing drug. This would have numbed his pain. It would have made the crucifixion, no doubt, easier, but yet he refuses it. And I think this is an important note that he did this willingly and with a full, sober mind. Jesus went to the cross to experience this for you and for me intentionally. He did it obediently and willingly. This is an important part. It says, when they had crucified him, verse 35, they divided up his garments among themselves by casting lots. And sitting down, they began to keep watch over him there. And above his head, they put up a charge against him, which reads, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Now, we just get this term here in verse 35, that they had crucified him, which is interesting. We don't have any scripture that gives the description of actual crucifixion. There was an article put out, I wanted to read to you. In 1986, Dr. William Edwards, he wrote a detailed description of what the crucifixion is involved. And I think it's important that I just want to read a portion of this. It says that although the Romans didn't invent crucifixion, they perfected it as a form of torture and capital punishment that was designed to produce a slow death with maximum pain and suffering. The victim's back was first torn open by the scourging, then opened again as the congealing, clotting blood came off with the clothing that was removed at the place of crucifixion. When thrown on the ground to nail the hands to the crossbeam, the wounds were again reopened, deepened, and contaminated with dirt. With each breath, the wounds were again opened. And with each breath, attached to the upright cross, the painful wounds on the back scraped against the rough wood and the upright beam and were further aggravated. Driving the nail through the wrist severed large median nerves. The stimulated nerve caused bolt of fiery pain in both arms and often resulted in a claw-like grip in the victim's hand. Beyond the severe pain, the major effect of crucifixion inhibited normal breathing. The weight of the body pulling down on the arms and the shoulders tended to lock the respiratory muscles in an inhalation state, thus hindering exhalation. The lack of adequate respiration resulted in severe muscle cramps, which hindered breathing even further. To get a good breath, one had to push against the feet and flex the elbows, pulling from the shoulders. Putting the weight of the body on the feet produced more pain, and flexing the elbows twisted the hands hanging on the nails. Lifting the body for a breath also painfully scraped the back against the rough wooden post. Each effort to get a proper breath was agonizing, exhausting, and led to a sooner death. Not uncommonly, insects would light upon the burrow into the open and burrow in to the open wounds of the eyes and ears and the nose of the dying and helpless victim. The birds of the prey would tear at these sites. Moreover, it was customary to leave the corpse on the cross to be devoured by predatory animals. Death from crucifixion could come from many sources. Acute shock from blood loss, being too exhausted to breathe any longer, dehydration, stress, and induced heart attack, a congestive heart failure leading to cardiac rupture. If the victim did not die quickly enough, the legs were broken, and the victim would soon be unable to breathe. A Roman citizen could not be crucified except by direct order of Caesar. It was reserved for the worst criminals, lowest of class. No wonder that the Roman statesman Cicero said, "Crucifixion is a crime to bind a Roman citizen. To scourge him is an act of wickedness. To execute him is almost murder. What shall I say of crucifying him? An act of so abominable, it is impossible to find any word adequately to express." The Roman historian Tacitus called crucifixion a torture fit only for slaves. Fit only for them because they were seen as subhuman. How bad was the crucifixion? We get our English word excruciating from the Roman word out of the cross. He summarizes, consider how heinous sin must be in sight of God when it requires such a sacrifice. I don't know, if you're like me, it's even hard to wrap your brain around what that even looks like. And then in the same breath, we're so desensitized by violent movies that we almost sort of just make it we kind of put it as a play in our mind or a action-packed movie. This was excruciatingly painful and brutal. And this is what Jesus did. This is the point. He went willingly, he went knowingly, he went sober-mindedly, and he went intentionally to pay the price, to pay the penalty, to make atonement for your sin, for my sin, so that we could be in right relationship with the Father. So not only is we've sort of set the scene of how excruciating painful this is, if we can even imagine a little bit of it. And at that time, it says, verse 38, that 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on his right, one on his left. And those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you're the Son of God, come down from the cross." And in the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and the elders, were mocking him and saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him. Now, if he delights in him, for he said, 'I am the Son of God,' and the robbers who had been crucified with him were also insulting him with the same words." There he is, in the midst of this excruciatingly painful, physical experience. He's being mocked by the very ones that he's hanging on the cross for. Matthew doesn't tell us much about the 2 robbers here that were on either side of him. Luke records for us an interesting interchange that I wanted to make note of with Jesus made with one of the robbers. In Luke 23:39, one of the criminals who were hanging there was hurling abuse at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other answered, and rebuking him, said, "Do you not even fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed are suffering justly for what we are receiving, but we deserve it for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he was saying, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly, I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise." Jesus, in the midst of what would be a time, I think, that you would just fully be like focused on how can I survive this moment, honors the prayer of this one who recognizes his sin and confesses it and believes that he is the Son of God. Back in our text here, Matthew 27. From verse 45, he says, "Now from the 6th hour, darkness fell upon the land." So it had been light up to this point. The Roman reckoning of time, this was approximately noon. According to Mark chapter 15, we understand that Jesus was on the cross for about 6 hours, and so there was half of it was in light, half of it was in this darkness that fell. It says that this darkness fell, verse 45, on all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of those who were standing there, when they heard it, they began saying, "This man is calling for Elijah." Immediately one of them ran, and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine, he put it on a reed and gave him a drink. But the rest of them said, "Let us see whether Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split, and the tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now the centurion and those who were with him, keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, they became very frightened, and they said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." And many women were there looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee while ministering to him. Among them was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of sons of Zebedee. Darkness came on. There were some supernatural events that happen at this time. And we get this statement here that he makes in verse 46, this statement Jesus makes in Hebrew. And this cry out to, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He was feeling the weight of the sin of the world upon him. A separation from his perfect Father that he had never experienced. Isaiah 53, verse 10 says, "But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. If he would render himself as a guilt offering, he will see his offspring, he will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied. And by his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many as he will bear their iniquities." Jesus was bearing our iniquities, the sin of the world. And as he yielded up his spirit, it says in verse 15 or 50, he says, Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, and he yielded up his spirit. Jesus decided when this was going to happen. This is important. I keep saying this, that Jesus went willingly. He decided when this was going to happen. Jesus was in full control the whole time, purposefully. No one took his life. He gave it willingly. And as he yielded up his spirit, some pretty crazy things happened here, right? The temple veil was torn. There was an earthquake, and dead people came alive. First of all, the temple veil. We know that in the temple there was the holy place and the Holy of Holies. And in the Holy of Holies was where the presence of God dwelt. And there was a large curtain there, this temple veil, that separated the place where the presence of God to mankind. Once a year, the high priest could go in there and make atonement. There was a separation between man and God. And here, as he yielded up his spirit, at the crucifixion, that separation was removed. And it says here that the temple was torn from the top to bottom. And I love this idea because it just shows and displays that this was a work of God. God did this. At the crucifixion, God removed that separation. He tore open that veil. Secondly, at the crucifixion, there was a seismic event. It says that it split rocks. You see that in verse 51? The earth shook and the rocks were split. At the crucifixion, God's power was demonstrated. Thirdly, at the crucifixion, dead people came to life. Now, I wish I could fully explain this verse to you. I can't. This is the only place we've got it, and there's not much on it. But dead people came alive. At the crucifixion, dead people came alive. What's the conclusion? At the crucifixion, because of the crucifixion, there's no more separation from our Heavenly Father. The crucifixion displayed God's power. And in the crucifixion, dead people come alive. And in a spiritual sense, we are dead in our sins and our trespasses, and we come alive through Christ. And to summary it all up, I think it said best well in verse 54, truly, this, and I'm going to take out was and say is, says the Son of God. So let's come back to our question. What are you going to do with this Jesus, the Christ? There it is. It's on you now. There. I've trapped you. I've got you. I've put it on you. Now you've got to deal with it. What are you going to do with Jesus the Christ? Are you going to submit? Are you going to believe by faith? Are you going to submit to his authority and the lordship of his life? Are you going to reject and mock him? I think we're here because we want to submit to him. And we want him to be Lord of our lives. And the temptation is not to deny his existence. His temptation is to deny his lordship. We're going to stop there this morning. And next week, we will look at the burial and the resurrection of Jesus. Let's stand and pray.